When detectives finally cracked open her locked phone, they expected answers. What they found instead was a secret so vile, even the most hardened officers turned away in disgust. Hey there, you're listening to Mr. Dar's Nights, where true crime meets the shadows. Before we dive deep into this disturbing story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, tap the like, and let us know in the comments where are you listening from tonight. Now get comfortable, because what's about to unfold is not for the faint of heart. She lived in a neat 2-story house with white shutters and a red mailbox shaped like a heart. The lawn was always mowed, the flower beds carefully arranged with seasonal blooms, and the flag out front changed with every holiday. People often commented on how meticulous she was. In a town like Auburn Hills, that kind of effort didn't go unnoticed. She wasn't just a mother, she was the mom, the one who remembered everyone's birthday, who baked cookies for the PTA, who showed up early for every school event and stayed late to clean up. Her name was Danielle Price, and to the outside world, she embodied perfection. Her 3 children were always dressed nicely, with hair combed and backpacks packed. At school, their lunches were the envy of other kids, home-cooked, thoughtfully packed with notes that read, "You got this," or "Make today magical." Other mothers admired her from a distance, some with admiration, others with a touch of envy. How did she do it all? Raising 3 kids on her own after her husband left? No one ever saw her break down. She never asked for help. She just smiled, nodded politely, and kept moving like a well-oiled machine. When her husband, Aaron Price, stopped showing up around town, most assumed the couple had split quietly. It wasn't uncommon. People whispered about how hard it must be for Danielle to raise 3 kids alone, but she brushed it off. "He's out of the picture," she'd say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. If someone asked further, she'd offer vague answers. "He's not around anymore," or "he moved away for work." No one pushed harder. Small towns like Auburn Hills run on unspoken rules, and one of them was, don't pry into another mother's pain. There was something about Danielle's calm that unnerved a few people, though. Her best friend from high school, Karen, once mentioned to her husband how Danielle seemed too put together. "It's like she's rehearsing being human," Karen said once after dinner at Danielle's house. Her husband laughed it off. "You're overthinking it. She's just strong." Maybe she was. Or maybe she was hiding something too dark to let slip. The town didn't notice when Aaron's social media went dark. There were no new pictures, no check-ins, no emails. Danielle said he didn't like technology anymore. She told the kids' teachers that he had chosen to go off-grid, to live somewhere simpler. Some believed it. Others didn't care enough to investigate. After all, she was there. She was dependable. She brought snacks to soccer practice and organized carpool schedules. What more could you want from a neighbor? As time passed, people forgot about Aaron altogether. Birthdays came and went without a father in the picture. The children never mentioned him. It was as if he'd been quietly erased, like a smudge on a whiteboard that no one remembered drawing in the first place. Danielle's social media told a different story. It was filled with smiling photos of her children, sunlit vacations, backyard barbecues, and quotes about motherhood and resilience. She seemed like a beacon of positivity. "Healing is letting go," read one caption beneath a picture of her holding a mug that said, "Boy Mom." No one suspected anything. Why would they? Behind closed doors, though, there were signs. Her youngest, Lucy, had started biting her nails until they bled. Her middle child, Caleb, had been caught stealing snacks from classmates' lunchboxes, claiming he was always hungry even though his lunchbox appeared full. Teachers sent notes home. Danielle responded with carefully worded emails, always taking responsibility, always promising to do better. It wasn't until the eldest child, 14-year-old Jackson, started acting out that questions arose. He was caught drawing disturbing images in his notebook. Pictures of graves, dark tunnels, and one that looked like a man buried beneath a tree. When the school counselor asked him what the drawing meant, Jackson just shrugged and said, "It's where Daddy sleeps." That comment led to a quiet but concerned conversation between the school counselor and the local authorities. It was probably nothing, they said. Kids say weird things. But there was something unsettling about the way Jackson had said it, like it wasn't imagination at all, but memory. Still, nothing came of it. A welfare check was done. The house was clean. The kids were fed. Danielle was charming and cooperative, if a little too practiced. The officers saw no reason to dig deeper. She's doing her best, they wrote in the report. For all intents and purposes, Danielle Price was the kind of woman towns like Auburn Hills were built to protect. A dedicated mother, seemingly abandoned by her husband, doing her best to raise a family. But what no one knew, what no one dared to question, was what happened inside that locked phone in her nightstand drawer. The one she never let out of her sight. The one that held the truth. And soon, the truth would come crawling out. Aaron Price wasn't the kind of man people expected to vanish. He was a creature of habit, a family man, an early riser, a father who made breakfast for the kids and packed their lunches before heading to work. He worked as a mid-level insurance analyst for a company downtown, commuting 30 minutes each way without complaint. He wasn't flashy or particularly social, but he was dependable. When he didn't show up at work on a Monday morning, his absence was noted. By Tuesday, his desk was still empty. By Friday, the supervisor called his emergency contact, Danielle. She told him he had left, that he had finally snapped under pressure of work and domestic life, and decided he needed to find himself. She said he'd left a note. No one ever saw it. The company didn't push. It wasn't their business. People leave jobs. People have breakdowns. It happens. Besides, Danielle seemed convincing, if a little robotic in her explanation. The HR file was marked with voluntary resignation, and that was that. But among his co-workers, the story didn't sit right. Aaron wasn't the type to disappear without a word. He had a strong work ethic and rarely took time off. He even responded to emails on weekends. For him to just vanish, it didn't add up. A few weeks later, his gym membership was canceled. His credit card stopped being used. His car was nowhere to be seen. Danielle said he had taken it. She mentioned he might be heading to Colorado or maybe Arizona. He always loved the mountains, she added when asked by a neighbor. There was something about the way she said it, like she was quoting a movie, not recalling a real memory. But no one challenged her. His family, what little remained, tried calling him. Texts went unanswered. His sister left voicemails that were never returned. Danielle deflected their concern with calm assurance. He just needs space. Please respect that. Eventually, they stopped trying. Aaron had always been a bit distant from his siblings, and Danielle had a way of making even the most troubling events sound reasonable. Back in Auburn Hills, Danielle didn't file a missing person report. When asked why not, she'd say, "Because he's not missing. He left." The police weren't alerted. There was no investigation, no search party. Months passed. Aaron's name slowly faded from daily conversation. People assumed he was just another man who abandoned his family. Some even pitted Danielle. Others judged her behind closed doors. Quiet whispers about what she must have done to drive him away. What no one knew was that Aaron had never used his bank accounts again. He hadn't withdrawn cash. He hadn't rented a car or booked a flight. There was no paper trail, no sightings, no activity on his driver's license. Even his online presence stopped. Social media accounts went dark. Emails bounced back. His phone disconnected. In the digital age, complete silence is louder than noise. Yet no one seemed to hear it. The kids never asked about him in public. When his name came up, they froze. They were well-behaved children, polite and cautious, but there was a visible discomfort when anyone mentioned their father. Lucy once told a teacher he was on a big trip, and Kayla once said, "Daddy's with the trees now." But both were young, and their words were dismissed as imagination. Danielle brushed off the remarks with a tight smile and said the kids were still processing things. In private, Aaron's sister couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She debated coming to town, but Danielle always discouraged it. "The kids are sensitive. They're just starting to feel normal again," she'd say on the phone. Her tone was flat but firm. The message was clear. Stay away. There were no legal actions taken by Danielle to file for separation or divorce. No assets were transferred. His name remained on the house deed. His life insurance policy was still active, and Danielle continued to pay the premiums. When questioned by the agent during a routine update, she confirmed everything was fine. Nothing about the situation raised red flags on paper. But behind the scenes, the reality was beginning to rot. The turning point, though unnoticed at the time, was the backyard renovations. Danielle had told the neighbors she was planting new fruit trees, building a small greenhouse. But there were no fruit trees, no greenhouse, just a patch of soil that stayed unusually soft for weeks. The kids weren't allowed near it. When asked about it, Danielle said it was still settling. She even joked about how Aaron used to complain about that spot being uneven, as if bringing up his name added some sort of truth to her lie. A few neighbors noticed a strange smell in the summer, but they blamed it on the compost bin behind the shed. After all, Danielle had taken up organic gardening, another one of her healing hobbies. No one reported anything. No one questioned further. The silence surrounding Aaron Price became its own kind of death, a disappearance without drama, an exit without closure. And for nearly a year, it worked. Danielle's version of events was the only one anyone knew, until the phone, the locked phone, the one she kept by her side, always, the one that held more than text messages and grocery lists. Because the truth wasn't that Aaron left. It was that he never had the chance. The call to local authorities came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. It wasn't an emergency, just a concerned relative requesting a welfare check. The caller was Aaron Price's sister, who hadn't heard from her brother in over a year. She explained how Danielle always seemed to deflect questions, how the children never spoke to her anymore, how everything felt too quiet for too long. "I know this sounds strange," she told the dispatcher, "but something feels very wrong." Because there had been no previous police reports or criminal complaints related to the Price household, the call was logged as routine. A pair of uniformed officers were dispatched to the residence under standard welfare check procedures. No lights, no sirens. Just a quiet knock at the front door of a well-maintained suburban home. Danielle answered with her usual composure. Hair tied back neatly, makeup light but perfect, posture straight. She wasn't surprised to see them. She said she understood. Family members sometimes overreact. She invited them inside and explained that Aaron had left the family to live off-grid, and she hadn't heard from him either. "He didn't want to be found," she added with a soft smile, like she was protecting a man who'd simply given up on civilization. The officers entered and made note of the home. It was spotless. Toys were tucked neatly into bins, dishes done, floors clean. The walls were decorated with family photos, Danielle and the children smiling at parks, birthday parties, school plays. There were no pictures of Aaron taken within the last year. Most include him only in earlier moments, like faded memories deliberately preserved but not updated. The children were home. They greeted the officers politely, but their behavior raised quiet suspicions. They were too polite, too quiet. They answered questions mechanically, as if rehearsed. When one of the officers asked about their father, the youngest child looked at Danielle before responding. The pause was short, but noticeable. "Daddy left," she said finally. "He didn't like living here anymore." One of the officers casually asked to use the restroom. While walking down the hallway, he noticed that one of the doors was locked. It wasn't the bathroom. Danielle, sensing his attention, quickly explained it was just a storage room. "Full of junk," she said. "Nothing worth seeing." The officer noted the response, but didn't push the issue. They weren't there on a warrant. It was just a welfare check. In the kitchen, a faint odor lingered beneath the scent of lemon cleaner. Not overpowering, but unsettling. It was something earthy, damp, and metallic. Danielle offered coffee. The officers declined. One of them noticed the countertops were unusually cluttered with vitamins, essential oils, and herbal powders, each labeled carefully in her handwriting. She explained she'd been researching alternative medicine. "After everything that happened, I just wanted to heal naturally," she said, voice even. One of the children dropped a glass in the other room. The shattering sound startled everyone, but Danielle didn't flinch. She excused herself to check on the situation. When she returned, she was holding a broom and smiling. "It's okay," she said. "Kids will be kids." Before leaving, the officers asked if there was anything else she wanted to share. Danielle's tone shifted slightly. She said people had been unfair to her, that not everyone understood how hard it was to raise 3 children alone. She said Aaron had abandoned them, but she'd kept it together for the kids. Her voice cracked slightly, as if on cue. "I just want to move on," she whispered. The officers left without incident. Their report described the home as clean and orderly. The mother was cooperative, emotionally stable. The children appeared healthy, though unusually reserved. There was no cause for immediate concern, but one officer jotted a private note at the end of the file. Locked room, faint odor, children hesitant. The phone wasn't mentioned in the report, but one of the officers had seen it briefly. A black smartphone placed face down on the kitchen counter, screen locked, notifications disabled. Danielle had picked it up quickly when she noticed his glance, slipping it into her cardigan pocket with practiced ease. A small gesture, but one that stuck in his mind. What the officers didn't know was that the phone hadn't been backed up to any cloud. It was the only place Danielle stored her secrets, her plans, her thoughts, her rules. It was protected by a password no one else knew, and it never left her side. Even while she slept, it remained under her pillow. Later that night, after finishing their shift, one of the officers brought up the visit again. Something was off, he said. Not illegal, just off. But with no evidence, no complaint, no physical sign of abuse or crime, there was nothing they could do. It was a clean file, like so many others. They moved on, but the locked door, the strange silence of the children, and the guarded presence of the phone would remain in the back of one officer's mind. Just a routine check, nothing more, until it wasn't. Because routine is what she was counting on. And routine is what allowed the horror to hide, just a little longer. Danielle Price's phone was more than a device. It was a fortress, always with her, never out of sight, and guarded with a passcode no one else knew. The phone had become her second skin. She carried it everywhere, even the bathroom. She kept it charging beside her bed at night. Screen face down, sound muted, with no notifications visible. If one of the children so much as reached toward it by accident, she would react instantly, calmly, but with a firm warning. "That's private," she would say, her voice soft but final. The phone held pieces of her life that weren't visible in family photographs or social media posts. It held the truth, the part she couldn't let anyone see. It was filled with apps hidden inside folders labeled with innocent names like recipes and budget. These folders weren't protected by fingerprint or Face ID. They required manual passwords, encryption apps, and biometric locks. To an outsider, it was an unusual level of security for a stay-at-home mother. To Danielle, it was necessary. Investigators only came into possession of the phone months later, after a second, unofficial welfare check. This time triggered by a school counselor's report about Jackson Price's disturbing behavior and drawings. The report didn't warrant a criminal investigation, but it gave law enforcement the leverage to dig a little deeper. A request for child wellness documentation evolved into an in-home visit involving social services. During that visit, Danielle's answers raised subtle inconsistencies, especially when she was asked about Aaron's whereabouts. Her responses didn't match earlier accounts. There were gaps in her timeline. Vague phrases like "he disappeared," "we had issues," and "he wanted to go off-grid" were repeated, but none were backed by specific details. One officer noticed the children flinching slightly when she spoke about their father. Another noticed how Danielle's fingers hovered protectively over her phone when questioned. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. The officers didn't confront her directly, but they flagged the behavior. As the meeting ended, a social worker asked to borrow Danielle's phone under the pretense of needing to make an urgent call. Danielle declined. She said the battery was low. Then she said it was dead. Then she said it was personal. Too many excuses, too quickly. A judge was contacted that same week. With the growing concern around the children's emotional welfare and Danielle's inconsistent narrative, a court order was issued to temporarily remove the children from the home and place them with Child Protective Services. That's when Danielle broke, not with tears or shouting, but with quiet resistance. She refused to hand over her phone voluntarily, clutching it until an officer had to physically take it from her hands. It was powered off, locked, and encrypted, and inside it, they would soon discover, was the darkness she had hidden so carefully. The phone was submitted to the department's digital forensic team. Cracking the device was not easy. Danielle had used multiple layers of security, including decoy folders and misleading data trails. But forensic software is patient. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't assume, and it doesn't miss. It took 4 days to break the main passcode. When they finally accessed a home screen, they found nothing suspicious at first, just photos of smiling kids, a few recipe apps, parenting forums, and digital planner widgets. But within the groceries folder, buried behind apps disguised with names like low-carb meals and daily checklist, they discovered a hidden vault. The vault required a secondary password. It took another 2 days to access. What lay beyond that vault was more than disturbing. It was grotesque. The vault contained hundreds of images and video files. Some appeared to document Aaron's physical decline over time. Photos of him sleeping, coughing blood into tissues, barely able to stand. There were handwritten notes, scanned and photographed, listing doses of herbal substances and household chemicals. Some notes described reactions, body temperature changes, and how long symptoms lasted. There were detailed spreadsheets tracking his behavior after meals. Even more shocking were the journal entries. Long, meticulous, and emotionless, they chronicled Danielle's growing resentment toward Aaron. She described feeling ignored, unloved, and invisible. But her words didn't read like the thoughts of a depressed woman. They read like a calculated mind documenting an experiment. She described how she introduced toxins gradually, how she masked bitter tastes in his food, how she enjoyed watching him grow weaker while pretending to care. One entry was titled Stage 3, Compliance. In it, she detailed how Aaron had become too weak to argue or question her. She began locking him in the guest room, which she had converted into a makeshift isolation space. That same room was the one police had found locked during the initial welfare check. The final file access was video, dated just days before Aaron's disappearance. It showed him barely conscious, begging for help. The camera never moved. Danielle's voice could be heard calmly in the background, asking him how he felt, taking notes. The footage ended abruptly. Investigators sat in silence as the data loaded. There was no mistaking what they had found. This wasn't a case of a missing person. It was premeditated, cold, methodical. The phone had revealed what no one in the town had suspected. Danielle Price was not a grieving wife. She was a predator with a plan. And that plan had lived in her pocket, hidden in plain sight. The phone had been her weapon. And now it was evidence. Inside the digital vault labeled groceries, investigators found what could only be described as a descent into darkness. Carefully cataloged, deliberately preserved, and utterly horrifying. What began as a few seemingly innocent documents, shopping lists, herbal remedies, wellness blog posts, quickly unraveled into something that felt more like a laboratory journal than a mother's phone. The folder was Danielle Price's secret world, one that no one had ever seen, and one that explained far more than any witness or child ever could. The earliest files dated back nearly 2 years, long before Aaron Price was officially considered missing. There were text notes with time stamps, many written in cold, clinical language. Rather than emotional outbursts of the rawness of a distressed wife, these entries read like data from someone observing a test subject. Subject displayed fatigue following ingestion of altered mixture. One note read. Another stated, administered second dose in tea. Vomiting followed within 30 minutes. Dilution too high. Adjust. The terminology she used was detached, almost scientific. Aaron wasn't referred to as my husband or Aaron. Instead, he became subject A, test meal 1, or simply patient. It was a disturbing detachment that pointed not only to cruelty, but also to a calculated, methodical intent. She wasn't reacting in rage or despair. She was planning, testing, refining. Among the notes were images, dozens of them, taken over long periods. Most were snapshots of partially eaten meals, open bottles of household chemicals, or the contents of her spice rack and medicine cabinet. Some showed used dishes placed near empty herbal supplement bottles, many of which had been altered, with the original labels scratched off and new ones written by hand. At first glance, The collection might look like obsessive record-keeping from a health fanatic, but deeper analysis revealed the underlying horror. She had been dosing Aaron systematically, in small but increasingly potent amounts, over a period of several months. Other documents inside the folder contained recipes that had been subtly altered. Chicken soup with a blend of sleep-inducing herbs. Smoothies that included digestive bitters and mood softeners. Notes next to each recipe detail the effects post-consumption: sluggishness, stomach cramps, nausea, memory fog. Danielle wrote everything down. She included the time of ingestion, the observed effects, and adjustments for future versions. Investigators also uncovered a separate subfolder titled Education. It was filled with screenshots from obscure blogs, PDF guides, and digital copies of old books on toxicology, herbal poisons, and even forensic countermeasures. Some documents discuss symptoms that mimic natural illnesses. Others explain how to create symptoms of food poisoning without leaving obvious chemical traces. She had been studying, not casually but with clear purpose. One particular document was disturbing in its implications. It was titled Natural Disappearance Protocol. This file listed step-by-step suggestions for making a spouse's absence appear voluntary. Remove digital presence slowly, cancel accounts over time, tell family and friends varying stories to confuse timelines, avoid filing police reports to prevent records. Danielle had followed these instructions almost to the letter. Beyond the poison documentation, there was another set of files, even more haunting: videos and audio recordings. Some were brief, just background footage of Aaron coughing, pacing, or lying down with labored breathing. Others were longer, audio clips of conversations where Aaron seemed disoriented, asking questions that were never answered. His voice grew weaker in each successive clip. One of the final recordings included a soft weeping sound, followed by Danielle whispering, "You did this to yourself. I gave you every chance." In one video, Danielle could be seen speaking directly to the camera, her face calm. "They'll think you left," she said. "You always talked about starting over. I'm just helping you do that." There was no emotion in her voice, no sadness, no anger, just resolve. It was as if she believed her own narrative, as if she had rewritten reality in her mind and was now living in it. Tucked in the back of the folder was a diary document titled Reclamation. It was a long, personal monologue written over several entries. In it, Danielle laid bare her motivations. She wrote about how Aaron made her feel small, how he dismissed her ideas, ignored her emotional needs, and treated her like an accessory. She described years of emotional neglect and quiet humiliation. But even within this confession, there was no sense of victimhood, only superiority. She referred to herself as the architect of justice, claiming that she had restored balance in her home. "When men take everything and leave crumbs, the only way to survive is to bake something new from the ashes," she wrote. The most haunting part wasn't her hatred. It was the clarity. Danielle didn't see herself as a killer. She saw herself as enlightened, empowered. The folder was her manifesto, her proof that she hadn't just gotten rid of a husband. She had reclaimed control, and now that the secret folder had been unlocked, investigators finally understood the true nature of the case. This wasn't about a missing person. It wasn't a story of heartbreak or abandonment. It was a digital blueprint of a silent, slow murder, planned in plain sight, hidden behind grocery lists and locked behind a screen. Danielle hadn't just committed a crime. She had documented it with pride. For months, the children had followed their mother's script without deviation. They said what they were told to say. They answered with politeness, offered carefully practiced smiles, and repeated the same lines when asked about their father. "He's away. He needed space. He went to live somewhere quieter." Their voices never shook, their eyes rarely met the questioners, and their expressions remained still, numb, distant, mechanical. To teachers, neighbors, and even relatives, it looked like sadness, perhaps confusion. In truth, it was fear. After the phone was seized and Danielle was placed in temporary custody, the children were removed from the home and placed into a protective foster care facility. It was the first time in years that they were apart from their mother for more than a school day. The first time they ate meals without being watched. The first time they slept without hearing the sound of her pacing the hallway or locking doors at night. Initially, they remained quiet. The oldest, Jackson, barely spoke. Caleb cried silently during interviews. Lucy clutched a stuffed rabbit and refused to make eye contact. Therapists, trained in trauma response, didn't press them. They waited. They listened. They allowed space for silence. And slowly, the cracks began to show. Jackson was the first to speak. He was 14, old enough to remember what his father had been like before he got sick. He began with vague statements. He used to be stronger, he said. Then, after a long pause, he used to laugh more. Then he stopped. Jackson spoke of dinner changing, how meals started to taste bitter, how his father would go to the bathroom and stay there longer each night. He remembered Aaron waking up with night sweats, how he started forgetting simple things. Jackson recalled how his mother would take notes while Aaron coughed, how she would shake her head and say, "This is what stress does to a man." Eventually, he admitted he had seen more than he ever understood. He spoke of the locked guest room, how his father was moved there, and how none of the kids were allowed inside. He said he once peeked through the keyhole and saw his father lie on the floor, too weak to get up. He remembered his mother catching him watching and calmly saying, "He's resting. You shouldn't scare him like that." That was the last time he tried to look. Caleb, only 10 at the time, recalled his mother mixing powders into drinks. He said she would tell them they were vitamins, but they looked like dirt. He remembered asking once why his father wasn't allowed to eat with them anymore. Danielle told him, "Grown-ups need quiet when they're healing." Caleb also remembered the rule about lying, how they weren't allowed to talk about what happened at home. His mother called it protecting the family. When asked how long their father had been gone, he said something chilling. Since before Christmas. Not last Christmas, the one before. That's when we stopped saying his name out loud. Lucy, just 7, didn't have a vocabulary to describe what she'd seen, but she remembered the fear. She remembered the smells, like old soup, she said, and how her mother would spray perfume near the locked door. She talked about the boxes her mother used to carry to the shed, and how she once saw something red dripping from one of them. She said it was paint, Lucy whispered, but it smelled like pennies. No one corrected her. They let her speak, her small voice offering glimpses into memories too heavy for a child. None of the children knew their father had died. In their minds, he had simply vanished. Danielle had crafted a narrative that allowed them to believe he had left by choice, that he had abandoned them. She filled their minds with half-truths, explaining his absence as a failure of love rather than an act of violence. Jackson admitted he had hated his father for a while, believing he had walked away from the family. He broke down when he realized the truth, that his father had been dying in the next room, and no one came to help. The children's testimonies provided a chilling perspective that no piece of evidence could match. Their stories, while fragmented, aligned perfectly with the timeline constructed from Danielle's phone and journals. They remembered the patterns, the changes in routine, the strange rituals their mother adopted as Aaron's condition worsened. They spoke of how Danielle would pray loudly, not to God but to some imagined justice. "He was always going to leave," she would say. "I just gave him a reason." When shown photos of the house and asked about the backyard, Jackson confirmed that his mother had started digging there months before Aaron disappeared. She told him it was for a garden. She never planted anything. The children were never allowed near that area after dark. She said the ground needed to settle, he recalled. The silence they had lived in wasn't peaceful. It was enforced. It was maintained through quiet threats, isolation, and an unspoken understanding that questioning their mother meant punishment, even if the punishment was subtle. A cold meal, a locked bedroom, no hugs, no warmth, just distance, enough to make even young children understand that obedience meant safety. When Danielle's case went to trial, the children's statements were entered into the record as key evidence. But long before they testified, it was clear to everyone involved that the silence in the Price household had been louder than any scream. It had buried the truth. It had masked the suffering. And only now, in their fragile voices, was the truth beginning to rise to the surface. Because monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they smile, and they call it motherhood. The turning point came when investigators secured a search warrant for the Price residence. Armed with the digital evidence retrieved from Danielle's phone and corroborated testimonies from her children, authorities had enough to begin the physical part of the investigation. Though Danielle continued to deny wrongdoing, the puzzle pieces were aligning too precisely. The data, the patterns of illness, the isolation of Aaron, and the strange behavior of the children pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Something was hidden beneath the surface, both figuratively and literally. The backyard had come up multiple times during interviews. It was the part of the property that Danielle had most carefully restricted. The children reported being kept away from it, particularly a specific patch of soil near the shed. Neighbors recalled how she had mentioned plans for a garden but never planted anything. One neighbor said they saw Danielle digging in the middle of the night. Another noted a chemical odor lingering for days. Still, no one had ever called the police. There was no overt cause for alarm at the time. When officers arrived at the house with the warrant, the backyard was their focus. The soil in question was noticeably different from the rest of the yard. It was loose, darker, slightly sunken in. The area had been recently disturbed, but not in a way that suggested typical gardening. The grass was absent, and the dirt had a texture and smell that suggested decomposition beneath the surface. Cadaver dogs were brought in. It didn't take long. Within minutes, they alerted. The spot Danielle had claimed was for a small greenhouse was suddenly at the center of a homicide investigation. Forensics teams began excavation cautiously. The top layer revealed remnants of construction tarp and plastic lining. Beneath that, a second layer of soil mixed with lime and wood ash. These materials are often used in amateur attempts to speed up decomposition or mask the scent of decay. Further digging unearthed a shallow grave, approximately 5 feet long and less than 3 feet deep. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic and old bed sheets, was a partially decomposed body of a male. Dental records, along with remnants of clothing and a wedding band, confirmed what investigators already suspected. It was Aaron Price. The autopsy would later reveal toxic levels of multiple substances in the system, compounds commonly found in herbal supplements, but administered in concentrations that far exceeded safe limits. There were traces of sedatives, natural sleep inducers, and plant-based toxins known to affect organ function and cognition. No single substance had killed him outright, but the slow and cumulative damage led to a breakdown of his systems. His body had been shutting down for months. Signs of physical restraint were present. There were ligature marks on his wrists and evidence that he had been moved post-mortem. The condition of the body suggested that he had died elsewhere in the house, most likely in the locked guest room, before being buried in the backyard. Alongside his body, investigators found other items: a small glass jar containing powder residue, a handwritten note soaked in moisture and mostly illegible, and a child's drawing that had been unintentionally buried with the remains. The drawing, later confirmed to be Lucy's, depicted a family of 4 standing next to a tree. One of the figures was crossed out in red crayon. No one could explain how it ended up in the grave. The backyard became the focus of media attention as word of the discovery spread. Forensic teams continued to examine the surrounding area, checking for additional remains or hidden materials. They found no other bodies, but they did uncover an old wooden box tucked inside the shed, filled with labeled containers and plastic bags. Each was marked with dates and short notes. Trial 1, too much, no reaction. Success. It was a physical extension of the digital records Danielle had kept. A hidden lab of sorts, camouflaged by the facade of a home garden. Neighbors expressed shock and disbelief. The woman who organized bake sales and helped with fundraisers had been living with her husband's corpse buried just feet away from where her children played. Some recalled seeing her watering the area. Others remember her sunbathing there, as if nothing were wrong. One neighbor remarked that Danielle had even hosted a barbecue months after Aaron's disappearance. Guests had been just yards away from his grave. The psychological weight of the backyard discovery was profound. It wasn't just the act of murder. It was the casual normalcy she maintained afterward. She tended to the grave like a gardener. She preserved his memory online, while letting his body rot beneath the soil. She built a life around the lie, smiling at neighbors, attending PDA meetings, and sharing wholesome photos of her children, all while knowing what lay beneath her feet. For the prosecution, The backyard was more than a crime scene. It was a final piece of proof. Physical evidence to match the digital trail, the forensic timeline, and the children's testimonies. The shallow grave told the truth that Danielle had spent years trying to bury. And like all secrets kept too long, it refused to stay hidden. Because the dead don't stay silent forever. Not when they're buried in your own backyard. The courtroom was silent the day Danielle Price's trial began. The prosecution had built a near impenetrable case, constructed from digital footprints, physical evidence, and the trembling but damning voices of 3 children whose lives had been meticulously staged to hide the slow death of their father. The state charged Danielle with first-degree murder, child endangerment, unlawful disposal of human remains, and tampering with evidence. But beyond the legal terminology, the case was something far more disturbing, a portrait of manipulation, psychological terror, and calculated cruelty. Danielle entered the courtroom without handcuffs, dressed in modest clothing, her expression flat. She showed no emotion when the charges were read, no reaction when photographs of Aaron's remains were presented, no visible concern when her own children took the stand. Her demeanor became a focal point in the trial. To the jury, it suggested either deep-seated attachment or a deliberate lack of remorse. She did not cry. She did not plead. She watched everything unfold with the same cold, controlled silence she had used to run her home. The prosecution began by detailing the timeline. Aaron's physical decline, the change in behavior from the children, the restricted access to the guest room, the secrecy surrounding the backyard, and the eventual discovery of his remains. They presented Danielle's phone logs, her journal entries, encrypted folders, and messages she had sent herself in coded notes. Every item was a nail in the coffin she had buried with her own hands. Expert witnesses testified on the toxic substances found in Aaron's system, lethal doses of sedatives and plant-based poisons introduced slowly over time. Forensic analysts explained how the phone's contents clearly showed premeditation. Psychologists gave insight into the emotional grooming of the children, detailing how Danielle had reshaped their understanding of reality through fear and quiet coercion. The jury heard how she crafted 2 parallel worlds, one public, one secret, and maintained both with ruthless precision. The defense tried to argue mental instability, citing past trauma, postpartum depression, and isolation. They painted Danielle as a woman pushed beyond the edge by neglect and emotional abuse. But the overwhelming volume of documentation undermined the plea. She had not snapped. She had planned. She had researched, tracked, recorded, and even documented successes in dosage experiments. Her detailed notes were not the product of delusion. They were the work of a mind completely in control. The most powerful moment came when Jackson, now in protective care, testified. He described the way his mother silenced questions, how she coached their stories, and how he watched his father become a shell of himself. He spoke about the locked room, the late-night whisperings, and the moment he realized his father wasn't coming back. Not because he left, but because he couldn't leave. Caleb and Lucy did not testify directly, but their recorded statements were played for court. When Lucy's small voice spoke about her mother's garden, jurors looked away. The horror wasn't just in the act of murder. It was in how Danielle had involved her children, emotionally, psychologically, even logistically, forcing them to live inside a lie built on death. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. Danielle showed no reaction as the foreman read the decision. The judge called her behavior monstrous, describing her actions as the cold dismantling of a man's life, dignity, and presence, carried out with surgical precision and a complete absence of empathy. In sentencing, he read aloud passages from Danielle's private journal, found on her phone, time-stamped just days after Aaron's death. One entry read, "He said he felt like he was disappearing. That's how I knew it was working. You can't hurt someone who's already fading away. You can only finish what they started." Another said, "The kids will be better without him. They'll understand one day. I gave them the version of him that was easiest to grieve." But the final entry chilled even the most experienced members of the court. It was dated the morning after Aaron died. The entry was short, only 6 words. "Being a mother was my disguise." In that single line, the entire case crystallized. Danielle hadn't simply been hiding a crime. She had been living it. wearing motherhood like a costume, using its built-in trust to shield herself from suspicion. She weaponized the very role that should have protected her children, and instead used it to cage them in silence. Following the sentencing, Danielle was transferred to a maximum security prison with no possibility of parole. Her children were placed with extended family under long-term psychological supervision. Their last name was legally changed. They wanted no part of the legacy she had left behind. The town of Auburn Hills never fully recovered. The house stood empty for months before it was demolished. Parents spoke in hushed tones about warning signs, about trust, about how no one really knows what goes on behind closed doors. The story of Danielle Price became a cautionary tale, not just about murder, but about the danger of appearances and the terrifying ease with which someone can mask evil in every day. She hadn't killed in rage. She hadn't killed in panic. She had killed with patience, preparation, and pride. And when confronted with the consequences, she didn't ask for forgiveness. She offered only one message, written plainly in her final recorded words. If you want to be free, sometimes you have to bury what's broken. But freedom built on death is never freedom at all. It's just another kind of prison, one lined with lies locked from the inside. Thank you for staying with us through this chilling journey. Some stories leave you uneasy. Others leave you haunted. This was one of those stories, where the truth wasn't just buried in the backyard, but behind a smile, behind a mother's touch, and behind the silence of 3 broken children. If this case disturbed you as much as it did us, take a moment to reflect on how appearances can deceive, and how darkness often hides in the most unexpected places. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think justice was truly served, or are there still pieces missing in this horrifying puzzle? Backhand index pointing right if you found this story gripping. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another disturbing tale from the shadows.